Welcome to Inconvenient Disparities, the podcast that brings uncomfortable truths about health and well-being gaps to light. We're diving into the stories, data, and voices that are too often ignored because closing the gap starts with facing it. And now, here's your host, Stephanie Monroe.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to this recording. Hi, everyone. Welcome to this broadcast of Inconvenient Disparities. And it's my great pleasure to introduce what I would call one of my partners in crime, Jason Resendez. Jason is currently the president and CEO of the National Alliance for Caregiving. So, hey, Jason, how you doing?
Hey, good. Good to see you, Stephanie. Excited to be part of your podcast and this little world that you're creating.
Well, I really appreciate it. You know, when you decide to move to a different place in life through retirement from, because I don't think I'll ever be fully retired.
Absolutely.
You sort of get to figure out, like, how am I going to continue to use my voice in 40 years of stuff to be doing? And I think really giving people a platform, especially people who, you know, we may not be completely politically compatible in all things, but one thing that everyone that I'm going to show on this podcast has shown is that we're willing to come together, put partisanship aside, and make good suggestions for solid policy. And that's what we really used to be about as a country. I know people will say things have changed a bit. I'm going to be positive and say they really haven't. I think a lot of us, though, who have more common sense have gone into the closet a little bit. And so we need to reemerge through that caterpillar stage. So you have always been one of those people. And, you know, I think it's really good for us to be able to listen and really hear what other people are saying. But what I really wanted to find out from you, Jason, because I've known you in various different exciting leadership roles, and I know your resume and your CV, and people can just Google you to find out more. But I wanted to have our audience a chance to just get to know you and what makes you you. Right? Tell me a little bit about your family and what you inspired to be, and, you know, if you had any challenges that you had to overcome, and how do you think that has affected your path and how you are now a president of a major organization?
Yeah, well, I love it. I appreciate the opportunity to share my story with you. And we did not plan that you're wearing red and I'm wearing blue. So always exciting to be in conversation and build bridges at the same time, just continue to be grateful for all the lessons that I've learned from you and growing up and being an advocate and being a policy professional. Really have been able to be more effective because of your example and leadership. So I appreciate that. And my story, you know, starts in a small town in South Texas called Alice, where I grew up, where my family's lived for over 5 generations. I grew up watching my mom raise 3 kids while working a full-time job and caring for my grandmother, who battled multiple chronic conditions, which is a dynamic all too familiar in Latino households across America and other households across America. And I watched her juggle care across those generations because she had a deep commitment to her mom, to her family, but also because she didn't have a choice. There were no other options in our community and in our family. So that was my first exposure to what care is. And I didn't know it at the time. My mom didn't know at the time that she was one of America's over 11 million sandwich caregivers. In fact, we'll release data next week that shows that there are actually closer to 20 million sandwich caregivers in this country. So she was this example and role model in care, and that care had consequences. For her, it meant that she was never able to finish her college education. She had this dream of becoming a certified public accountant, but that dream took a backseat to the care that my grandmother required, that the care her children required. So she wasn't able to fulfill that dream. It meant that we had less money as a family, so we weren't able to go on the vacations that my friends did. You know, it meant that she had to dip into her savings and really wasn't able to save much. And so she's still working as a result of those choices that she had to make as a caregiver and as a mom early on. So those are some of the challenges that we faced that were the result of care and her commitment to care. Fast forward 25, 30 years later, I'm now the father of an amazing 3-year-old, this chaotic, joyful, interesting little person
Who I've yet to
who
be able to give a hug to, but that's going to happen.
we'll fix it. We'll fix that. He's a wild guy. If you can catch him, you can hug him. He every day, especially I recognize that the care that my mom provided for my grandmother and the care that I provide for my son is part of a continuum of care. A continuum of care that collectively is undervalued and underinvested in, right?
Yes.
From a elder care perspective, we don't have the right systems in place to support elder care. And because of that, my mom's care was a lot harder than it needed to be. We don't have the right systems in place to support child care either, right? So there's this broken system across a lifespan that makes care so much harder than it needs to be. And that's the perspective that I bring to the work that I undertake every day at the National Alliance for Caregiving, to try to shift that paradigm so that we can really value the contributions of caregivers. And that's rooted in my family's experience, my experience with my mom, and also experience working with advocates and colleagues, because we all have a care story. And I know your care story has certainly influenced how I approach this work as well.
You know, I was just thinking about this the other day, that I have a history in our family of caregiving like you. And I really hadn't even thought about it. It was like, my grandmother, I grew up in my grandmother's house, and she was actually taking care of her mom and her brother, who was a severe burn victim. So we lived in a row house, and she was doing that and wasn't working. Actually did side jobs peeling tomatoes, if you can imagine that.
Yeah.
Side job just to keep things going. And then my mom was taking care of my grandmother. And then I'm of course taking care of my father now, who's got Alzheimer's, and I took care of my mom until she passed last April. And I've also brought my aunt, who has Lewy bodies dementia, across. So I'm hoping my children are paying close attention, because they are my care plan.
Absolutely. I'm writing notes because I love that concept, that history of caregiving, right? We talk about like our history of heart disease, you know, your Dr. Assy, your family history. We never talk to each other about our history of caregiving.
Right.
And that is such a powerful concept, because I think about that too. That's when I think about my family, it's very similar. It's like, sure, my mom was a caregiver providing care for my grandmother, but then I think about my grandfather. He provided care for my grandmother before she died too young because of cancer, and he was her primary caregiver. So, you know, so many families have this rich history of care, but because we don't do enough to recognize and value that care, it too often lives in the shadows, and we don't celebrate it and we don't support it.
And people who are providing those essential services and love, they oftentimes don't. I never considered myself a caregiver, right? I just considered myself the daughter or the granddaughter or the niece. And so we're doing that work a lot of times in the shadows, which means when programs like yours and others that might be offered by AARP and others say, we're going to provide respite for caregivers. I don't even know what that, I didn't know what that was. And then caregivers, those must be the people I pay, right?
Yeah.
Redefining and making it okay to say, this is something we're doing, or even if we're doing it long distance. So it's wonderful. And it's great seeing you, you know, in these multiple generations that you are continuing.
Yeah.
And now you get to bring public attention to it. I mean, you know my story, that I worked on Capitol Hill for a long time, and I feel like I was one of the first senior staff to get pregnant and remain in the job. And my boss was great, and he gave me time off before we even passed like family medical leave. I didn't have to worry about being fired, and he gave me, you know, it was just wonderful. I felt very supported. Many of my other colleagues did not. In fact, some of them, I joke, were told that if they wanted to have a baby, they could, but it had to be during the August recess.
Yeah.
So it really wasn't family focused.
Not convenient.
Not convenient at all. Inconvenient disparity.
Absolutely.
People would leave. They would lose their professional careers because, you know, those questions that you're not supposed to ask, like, do you plan on having children anytime soon? Or tell me about your family, and you're really trying to size up. How much can I expect you to be giving up everything? There's really no such thing as family life balance. You have to just insist on the things that are priorities for you. So I know you've been out and talking to lots of folks. What keeps you up at night? I mean, we have not done enough. I mean, it's been 20 plus years or more that we have decided to have, the kind of paid leave policies that allow people not to get fired, but we're not doing things to really support them as a nation. We've got lots of employers who are doing it, but not as a nation to do that. What is keeping you up at night, and what is your work centered on to get us to be able to move forward on this?
Yeah, absolutely. So what keeps me up at night is exactly that we haven't made progress at the pace that we need to make progress in terms of recognizing and valuing caregiving. And what especially keeps me up at night is that what's going to happen to my son, right? I think about he's 3 now. Time flies so fast, right? When he's my age, are we going to have those systems in place when it might be his turn to provide care for me or for my husband, right? I worry about his future and what caregiving might look like in his future. That creates a sense of urgency, but also creates a sense of opportunity, right? Sort of the work that we do now has ripple effects. And we have made some modest but important progress. So we just released research that shows that over the last 10 years, the number of family caregivers in this country has grown by almost 50% to 63 million Americans. So nearly 1 in 4 Americans in this country are providing care for someone with a serious illness, a disability, or with age-relating challenges. Complex, ongoing, demanding care. That's larger than the state of California.
Wow.
It's a huge community of Americans who every day in the shadows make all other work possible because of the care that they provide. And while we have made some progress, particularly at the state level, right? States stepping up and passing paid family and medical leave policies now in 13 states in the District of Columbia. We have states like Nebraska establishing caregiver tax credits. We have states like Washington State establishing a state level long-term insurance program, long-term care insurance program. We see employers stepping up and offering caregiver benefits. So one of those is flex time. Which definitely during the pandemic became much more common, but has accelerated over the last 5 years and has grown to go beyond just flex time to include caregiver-specific benefits like access to care navigation services like Clio and Wealthy and Carry Loop, sort of benefits that are geared towards helping families navigate caregiving responsibilities, either childcare responsibilities or family care responsibilities. At the same time, our data shows that there's still big challenges and inconvenient disparities in terms of who has access to those services. So we know that women still are more likely to shoulder the responsibility of care. They're providing care for longer periods of time. They're providing more intense care compared to men providing care. We know that women of color, especially, are more likely to be in high intensity care situations, and they're the least likely to have access to supportive care policies. We know when it comes to employer supports for caregivers. So while we've seen those drastically increase between 2015 and 2025, there's a big disparity between salaried employees and hourly based employees. So it's great to see some incremental progress. That's really critical to address the crisis that's happening now. But that incremental progress is not keeping up with the demand for family care in this country. And that's what worries me when I think about my son, when I think about what his care will look like when fast forward 20 to 30 years, that we're not with the urgency that's needed, building that infrastructure to value care. That's really worrying.
And it's especially concerning to me, and I don't understand this, why the United States, we consider ourselves sort of the leader of the free world. Yet when it comes to doing things that are employer and family friendly, we are lagging behind every other industrialized nation in the world. I don't get that. We should be at the front. We are, really a blessed nation. We've got great economy. We've got, so many freedoms, but the freedom to be where you need to be and have
Yeah.
valued and supported. Also, I think a lot of people think that, it's caregiving is free if you're providing it yourself. And as you just said, many of the caregivers, like, we're stepping out of the workplace, which means we're not paying taxes. So we're shrinking the impact of the ability of the government. We just need some time with our family members. We just want to be at their bedside when they're sick, or my dad can't have his own voice because he has Alzheimer's. I just want to take off a day every now and then. And as you said, I'm happy to flex it. I'm happy to work overtime and just do those things. So it's just unbelievable that we can't sit together. And I don't think it's because people don't want to do it. There's so many yin and yangs, right? There's so many, well, we don't want the employers to do it. Well, we don't want to make our country go into debt more. Well, all of these things. It's like we just got to do it,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And it is this big paradigm shift that needs to happen. I think one of
Mhm.
the big issues is right now in this country, there's this predominant narrative that caregiving is a personal responsibility, when really it's a shared responsibility. We
Mhm.
all benefit from care. We're all going to need care at some
Yes,
point in our lives, right? Care is, as one of the sort of my mentors in this space, Ai Pu says, care is the work that makes all other work possible, right? So you
that's
hit the nail on the head, right? If we're able to continue to provide care, folks can stay in the workforce for longer. They contribute to Social Security and the viability of the Social Security program over the long term. We
yeah,
all benefit when care is accessible and dignified and sustainable. But because there's this assumption that care is really, it's your problem, right?
yeah,
I don't need it, right? It's
yeah,
it's your personal responsibility. We're not investing in that infrastructure. And it is really ironic given, like you said, the US is supposed to be family first, right? We care a lot about families, we care a lot about independence, yet we're not investing in policies like paid family and medical leave, home and community-based services that enable people to have strong families, to stay in the workforce, that enable you to make choices about where you receive care and age in place. I mean, that's one of the most ironic things about these cuts to the Medicaid program that just
yeah,
took place. And I won't go too much into it, right?
yeah,
But
yeah,
well, at the heart of that is this reality that we live in a country where you have a right to institutionalized care, to care in a nursing home, right? Medicaid is as a mandatory payer for nursing home care. Yet you need a waiver for home and community-based services. Home and community services are optional. And so we're making these policy decisions that are really forcing people to move from providing care and receiving care in their homes and in their
mhm,
communities into institutionalized settings, which are lower quality most often and are costly, extremely costly
yes,
compared to home-based care. So it is, I think, continues to mystify me why we in this country promote independence and pulling yourselves up for your bootstraps, but we're not investing in policies that enable us to do that as we age
right.
over time.
And we're bankrupting ourselves. I mean, I think,
Absolutely.
many of us caregivers, you know, I'm wonderful. I'm blessed that I have a good career and even good retirement. As a former federal employee, I'm good, but I'm still putting out 8 grand a month, and I'm home with my dad full time. But I need help. I can't tell you. I've dislocated my shoulder. I broke my
Yeah,
pinky trying to care for
absolutely.
my dad because I don't know how to do that. So I've had to bring in help, and that's 8 grand a month. So
Yeah.
bye bye 401k.
Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head. It doesn't, just because it's family care doesn't mean it's free, right? And
Right.
also, to your point, just because it's family care and it's unpaid care doesn't mean it's unskilled, right? It takes a lot of
It
skill in order
really
to be
does.
able to provide care, and that's valuable
Mhm.
experience and has a value to, while you might not be reaping it. Certainly your dad
Yes.
is which is, the best part about this. But You know who else is accruing that value? Your insurance company, the Medicaid program, the Medicare program, because you're absorbing those costs and responsibilities and they're not being absorbed by your insurer or your Medicare program or Medicaid, right? So there's this huge, AARP has calculated it to the tune of around $600 billion a year is the economic output of family caregivers like yourself.
Right.
Uh, and that is, that's a real value that if you disappeared, that would send your father into an institutional setting
Right.
and would bankrupt the Medicaid program if all of our nation's 63 million family caregivers disappeared. We would bankrupt the Medicaid program because of the level of institutionalized care that would then be required.
Boy, you just made me think maybe we should all do that for a day or two and see what happens to the
Yeah,
economy.
go on a care strike. I mean, if folks didn't,
Wow.
that care wasn't so essential. And I think this is the
I
thing,
know.
like this care is so essential, right? These are frontline
Yes.
workers. When we think about, the pandemic introduced and expanded that
Yeah.
concept of who are frontline workers, like caregivers are frontline workers. Like we can't afford to go on strike, but that doesn't mean that caregivers should be exploited by
Exactly.
insurance companies, by employers. I mean, we have to do more to recognize and invest in that
And
value.
and frankly, the companies, and I hate to say this, but it's about truth, right? Some of these companies that employ people to be paid caregivers, and I'll give you my example without naming the company, I'm paying them $47 an hour with a minimum of 3 or 4 hours a day of care to come and get my dad ready for breakfast and, in the evening to get him tucked away for bed. They're only giving the caregivers under that program $15 an hour, which is what I pay to have someone come and walk my dog.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's a great example of like this is the direct care. I mean, this is why it's so hard, but also so important that we figure it out. Is there's these adjacent broken systems, right? Sort of the lack of support for family caregivers interfaces with the broken direct care workforce economy, right? Where there's wages are too low, there's not enough competition, there's not enough quality, there's not enough support, there's not the supply. It
Yeah.
intersects with immigration issues, right? It is one of those things that um, demonstrates how multifaceted the care crisis is
Yeah.
and why we can't, solve one thing while ignoring another, right? We can't address, the wage issue of direct care workers without thinking about what the impacts of that are on family caregivers and vice versa, right? We have to think about these in an interconnected way. And that's where, policy becomes so critical and where we need to recognize that the federal government just needs to step up, right? This
They
is a
absolutely
common
do.
good in the same
Right.
way that public education is a common good that reaps benefits for competitiveness, for economic growth. I mean, it's just the argument is so clear, but it's this cultural inability to value that, I think, that is shifting. I think that's one of the
I
other
think so
things that we
too.
see
I
is
think so
it's
too.
shifted.
But we need to move faster because our
Oh,
population is
absolutely.
only aging exponentially. And, I was working on the Hill when we did long-term care, and it lasted like a week before it was repealed. And that was a real problem. That was a real opportunity. But I think we're seeing some breaks in the ice. We're seeing some bipartisanship among doing some things, but unfortunately, it's nibbling around the edges. It's not really tackling this as a big issue. It's a defense issue.
Yeah.
We can't even get people in the armed services because they have all these concerns because they want to send, both spouses into the military. I digress. I shouldn't even be bringing that up.
Yeah.
But things that you would think that doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about competitiveness. I mean, we either do this now or we're going to do it later, and the return on investment is going to be a lot lower later than now,
Absolutely.
right? Like we're seeing that in other super aging countries, like Japan, for example, who's done a much better job of conceptualizing and supporting family policy across the board. But it's happening a lot later. We have an opportunity to learn from those other countries, and we're
Exactly.
just not, taking advantage of that. And there's this definitely a tremendous need to think about it from a competitiveness
Yeah.
perspective, from an economic mobility perspective.
Yeah. I mean, even though, politically, I know we're a little bit on different sides necessarily, I think But I think we agree. I believe that one of the things that I would love to happen before I leave this earth, I want to see a broad paid family and medical leave program that meets people where they are. And I want to see a living refundable tax credit for people who have to spend money for care. I think those are things we have to do. We might need to make some cuts in other programs to be able to afford to do it. But I feel like at this point, we can't afford not to.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and those are great examples of when we look at our research, those are heavily supported by family caregivers. When you ask family
Yeah,
caregivers what do they want to see in terms of policies, paid family and medical leave, right? Recognizing that folks are, working while they're providing care, but we need to help them balance those two responsibilities. And paid family and medical leave does that. It's not a silver bullet, but it's an important tool in the
right.
toolbox to make care sustainable, right? That's my kind of soapbox. We worked together at Us Against Alzheimer's where we were like, we can and someday will cure Alzheimer's disease, right? We're never going to cure caregiving, right? Caregiving is something that we tend to, that we work on across, as long as there's people who love each other, there's families, there's connection, there's always going to be care and a need for care, and there's joy that comes from care. But we need to make it more sustainable. And policies like paid family and medical leave, policies like caregiver tax credits help to make care sustainable. And I think your example, and this is why I love working with you, is also recognizing this is a generational issue,
Mhm.
right? This is an issue because, care will always be with us. There's always going to be a new policy to rise to the occasion to update care and to support care. And your example of, I can imagine 40 years ago, the idea of even a family and medical leave, right, was something that was foreign and people
It
thought
took
was
seven.
impossible.
It took 7 years for Congress to pass that. It coming up every year and did not get enough votes. And we had to make some changes because you don't get the whole pie, right? And
Yeah,
so I think that's one of
absolutely.
the problems today is both sides want 100%. It's like, it's not good policy if it's 100%. We have a country that's split. So let's think about what we really need and make it happen working together. Like
Yeah.
I could just do this and solve the problem.
Yeah, yeah, and we continue to make like it moves the goalpost, right? So
Yeah,
now it's like, oh, now the baseline is you should have protected time to provide care. Now the new standard needs to be that time should not just be protected, it should be paid for,
right.
right? That leads to better outcomes. And then I think, we'll continue to build on those new baselines. And I'm excited on the paid leave side, I agree with you, like a matter of when, not if this is going to happen because we continue to make progress, right? So even from FMLA to a historic, and you and I work really closely on this historic passage of a comprehensive paid family and medical leave program for the first time in the House. Sure, it died in the Senate, but it set a new standard of what's possible. And then even now with the HR1, the one big beautiful bill, to see make permanent employer tax credits for paid leave, right? So it's certainly nowhere near the comprehensive solution for paid
Mhm.
leave that we need. It certainly is not going to transform people's situations, but it represents an incremental acknowledgement that paid leave is the future, and that this is something that more employers and ultimately at the federal level we need to step up and support.
And it shows what we value, and that's really important.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
Jason, thank you so much for this. Of course, I love having conversations with you, and I'm looking forward to great work that we'll continue to do together.
Well,
Thanks.
I appreciate your voice, and being one of the over 63 million Americans who provide care in this country. Your advocacy, your impact certainly is helping to brighten the outlook for their future. So thank you.
Thank you.